So we're going to talk about two different ways in which surveys can be administered. One of the ways we're going to talk about is the methods of survey research, but before we get to the methods, I want to talk about the modes. And the modes really have to do with whether a human being or a computer is administering the survey, and whether that survey is being administered by an interviewer or a respondent. So I'm going to put up this chart here, and we can see there are four modes, generally speaking, of data collection. Now, there are actually more than four, but these are the four that we commonly use. And this chart here can help you to understand what distinguishes these four from each other. So we have a person-administered survey, which involves a human interviewer and no computer being used to administer the survey. Now, I want to caution you when I use the word computer here. I'm talking about a computer program. I'm not talking about a physical computer. And a computer program could be administered through devices like smartphones or tablets or things like that. It doesn't have to be what we consider to be a computer, like the thing sitting behind me. Computer means computer program, some kind of computerized program that's being delivered through an electronic form. But a person-administered survey, the person that is administering the survey can use a computer to enter their data. It's just the computer isn't guiding their survey process along. I'll break that down in a minute. If you have no human interviewer and you have no computer that's involved in administering the survey, then it's called a self-administered survey. And that's where the respondent takes the survey themselves, and there's nobody to tell them what's right or wrong or good or bad. They just do whatever they want to do. If you have a computer that's being used to administer the survey but no human interviewer, then you have a computer-administered survey, which means basically the computer is handling all of the tasks that an interviewer would normally handle. And if you have an interviewer who's entering data into a computer program, then that's a computer-assisted survey. So what makes these all different from one another? Well, a person-administered survey, first of all, we have a human being that is playing the role of an interviewer who is interviewing a human respondent. So you have two people, basically. The human interviewer can ensure that the questions are being asked correctly and that they're being understood properly. So, if I am administering a survey to a respondent and I can tell that the respondent doesn't understand the question that I just asked, or maybe they're getting hung up on a word or something, I can, as a human interviewer, I can clarify that question. I can make sure they understand it. And if they give me an answer that's just really out in left field and I'm not sure that they understood the question properly, I can ask them if they want to revise their answer and make sure that they understand what I was actually asking. So the human interviewer in that case decides what data to record. During a interview, there are going to be data that I'm not necessarily going to record. People say and ah a lot. I don't necessarily record that. People might start to answer a question and then break off and think about it and then start again, and I might not record that first part, or I might scratch out that first part as they start to answer the question differently. There might be times where they make a joke or they laugh or things like that. I'm not going to record that. So there are things that are going to get left out of the interview because the human being is going to make a judgment about what is and is not important to record. The human interviewer can probe or clarify answers as needed, and that's really important, especially in more open-ended lines of questioning. If somebody tells me that they feel, I'm pretty satisfied with this, but things could be better, I might probe and say, well, tell me how they could be better. So a probe allows me to get deeper and to make sure that they fully answer the question. A couple of examples of a person-administered survey, by the way, would be like a job interview where you're interviewing with a potential boss or an HR representative, and they can ask you lots of questions and kind of have a conversational style interview with you. Or a journalistic interview, and both of these kinds of interviews can be structured or unstructured, where either they're just asking questions as they occur to them, or where they have a guide that they're actually taking you through, and they might be making quantitative assessments as well as qualitative assessments. They could do either one. Person-administered surveys tend to be used in in-depth interviewing, but they could be used in other contexts as well. Intercept interviewing, for example, where a researcher actually stands out somewhere and collects people and brings them in. There are other methods as well we'll talk about in the next part of the lecture series. Next, we have the self-administered survey, and that's where a human respondent takes a survey where he or she is in complete control of what's submitted. These are often done on paper, not always, but often done on paper. And in this case, the human respondent is responsible for interpreting what questions are asking and how to reply to them. So, I think the most common form of self-administered survey we're all familiar with is a paper survey where you can write whatever you want, wherever you want, and answer the questions in whatever way you think is valid. So if the question asks you, how satisfied are you on a scale of 1 to 5, and you write in Mickey Mouse, you can do that. It's okay. It's not usable data, and it's going to get deleted from the data set probably, hopefully, but you can do that as a respondent. So that means that there is often kind of a lower level of quality to these responses. Also, there's never a lot of certainty that the people that were answering the questions actually knew what they were responding to, and so these are not the best surveys to use in really high-level decision making, but they can be useful for just collecting general data. And of course, take-home tests and mail surveys are two examples of self-administered surveys because there's nobody there telling you what to do. You just have complete power to do it on your own. Now, one variation of the self-administered survey is what's called a group-administered survey, and that's more like taking a test in a class or doing your instructor evaluations that you'll be doing later this semester, where you have a group of people that are together and they're all given a self-administered survey, and there's usually somebody in the room to proctor, to make sure that if you have questions that they can be answered, but you're still taking the survey yourself, and there's nobody there guiding you through the process unless you have a specific question, and then you turn it in when you're done and you leave or move on with your day or whatever it is that you do. Next, we have a computer-administered survey, and that's where a computer program administers a survey to a human respondent. And again, I want to specify, the computer is not just physically present. In fact, there might not even be a computer in the room. You can do a computer-administered survey over the phone using a robocall if you really want to, where computer voice reads things to you. The point is that the computer program is handling the survey, and there's no human interviewer involved in the process. It's the computer program and the respondent. And the computer is programmed with all of the survey rules, all the survey logic, all of the questions, but it generally doesn't have the ability to probe, and it generally can only offer limited validation. In other words, if it asks what year were you born and you type in, the word 70, it can say, oh, I only want numbers. So there are some limited options that you have available, but not a lot. It can also make sure, if you're supposed to answer a question and you don't answer it, that you do answer it. It can do things like that, but it's still pretty limited. The human respondent in a computer-administered survey enters data directly into the program with no interviewer involved, and that's really key. No human being other than the respondent is involved in this process. The computer is going to take the data, tabulate it, and analyze it once the survey is over. So it'll usually add it into a new data or into a data set, and then provide analysis on the back end to the researcher. So an example would be your Blackboard quizzes, where you enter in your responses to the quizzes, and then the computer system that Blackboard runs on tabulates your answers and sends me a report that tells me what your grade was and what the other students' grades were. Online surveys, which are very commonly used forms of surveys, are also generally computer administered. We also have the computer-assisted survey, and the computer-assisted survey is where a computer program administers a survey to a human interviewer, who is then reading that survey to a human respondent. So this is a situation where it's kind of like the computer-administered survey, except that you have an interviewer involved who can be there to ask questions, to probe, to drill down, to make sure that they really understand what's being said, to answer any questions that the respondent might have, and the computer process also ensures that you have a high level of data quality and that you have that real-time reporting and things like that, but the human interviewer still ultimately gets to decide what gets put into the software. So the computer might kick up some rules and say, hey, you can't answer the question that way, if the human interviewer doesn't do their job correctly, which is useful. But also, again, somebody laughs or tells a joke, or they use some filler words, or they don't completely answer a question and it has to be restated. That doesn't go into the computer unless the human interviewer decides to enter it in. So a couple of different surveys that you might have encountered with this would be like a point of sale survey, where somebody's standing at a cash register and they ask you a few survey questions while you're checking out, or CATIE interviews, computer-aided telephone interviewing, where a human interviewer calls you on the telephone. They're sitting at a computer terminal that is giving them the survey, giving them the script, giving them the prompts. They're just reading it to you, and then they're entering the data. It's a very common use of a computer-assisted survey. So again, here's our chart with the 4 modes of data collection, and I want you to note this red wording at the bottom here of the chart. It says, note that these approaches can also be combined in what's called mixed mode or hybrid survey design. So in other words, you can take these and use them together in a study for different reasons. I've used, for example, a computer-assisted survey over the phone and then a computer-administered survey online to sample two different groups of people and then compare their results. And I've done that because I know that younger people tend to be more easily reached through online surveys and older people tend to be more easily reached through the telephone. But the problem is, even in comparing those data, I have to be familiar with some effects. People answer questions differently when they're reading them on a computer screen than when they're hearing them on the phone. And so even though a computer is involved in both aspects of administration, the fact that I have a human interviewer talking on the phone and entering things into a computer on the one hand, and then a respondent entering things directly into the computer on the other hand, means that I get very different kinds of data. One thing I'll also tell you is that if you're going to collect any kind of open-ended responses or qualitative responses, you get much better results if there's a human interviewer involved than not. If it's a purely quantitative survey, computer-administered is a good way to go. But if you have a need for a lot of open-ended response and detail, it's good to have a human being involved. Self-administered surveys, they can kind of be a crapshoot. It really depends on who you're surveying, how complicated the survey is, and what it is that you're hoping to learn. Sometimes they get great data, sometimes they get really, really useless junk. So it just depends on the application.